every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. The wind whispers through the towering pines of the Montana wilderness, a sound both ancient and indifferent. It carries the scent of damp earth, pine needles, and the profound, almost suffocating silence of isolation. Here, amidst the rugged beauty of the Rocky Mountains, a man lived a life stripped bare of modern conveniences, a life deliberately chosen to escape the very society he would come to despise with a venomous intensity. His cabin, a crude 12-by-10-foot structure, was a testament to self-sufficiency, a fortress against the encroaching world of technology he so vehemently rejected. Yet, from this primitive sanctuary, a sophisticated terror would be unleashed, meticulously crafted and strategically deployed, leaving a trail of fear, injury, and death across the United States for nearly 2 decades. This was the world of Theodore John Kaczynski, a man known to the world as the Unabomber. He was a mathematical genius, a Harvard graduate, a former Berkeley professor whose intellect was undeniable, yet whose mind became a crucible for a destructive ideology. His story is not merely one of crime, but of a profound and disturbing transformation, a descent from academic brilliance into a solitary, violent crusade against the industrial technological system. It is a narrative woven with threads of genius, paranoia, meticulous planning, and ultimately, the agonizing moral dilemma faced by his own family. Today, on Anatomy of Crime, we dissect the chilling anatomy of a radicalized intellect. We will explore how a prodigious mind, once destined for academic greatness, became consumed by a singular destructive ideology, leading to a nationwide manhunt that baffled the FBI for years, and culminating in a family's impossible betrayal. We will trace the trajectory of Ted Kaczynski's life, from his precocious childhood and unparalleled academic achievements to his self-imposed exile and the calculated acts of terror that defined his infamous legacy. We will delve into the meticulous nature of his bomb-making, the intellectual underpinnings of his anti-technology manifesto, and the painstaking investigation that ultimately brought him to justice. This is the story of the Unabomber, a case that forces us to confront the complex interplay between intellect, isolation, and the destructive power of conviction. Theodore John Kaczynski was born on May 22, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, to Wanda and Theodore Richard Kaczynski. From an early age, it was clear that Ted was different. He was exceptionally bright, displaying an intellectual precocity that set him apart from his peers. His mother, Wanda, a woman of considerable intelligence herself, recognized and nurtured his gifts, but also observed a certain social awkwardness, a difficulty in connecting with others that would become a defining characteristic of his life. The family moved to Evergreen Park, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, where Ted's younger brother David was born in 1949. The Kaczynski household was, by many accounts, a stable and loving environment, though perhaps a bit reserved. Ted's father, a sausage maker, was a quiet man, but supportive of his son's intellectual pursuits. Ted's early academic career was nothing short of meteoric. He skipped 2 grades, entering high school at the age of 13. His intelligence was undeniable, but his social integration remained a challenge. He was often bullied, a target for his perceived differences and his intellectual superiority. His classmates, older and often less intellectually gifted, found his quiet intensity and academic prowess alienating. This period of social isolation and torment, some speculate, may have contributed significantly to his later withdrawal and resentment, fostering a deep-seated sense of alienation from his peers and, by extension, from society at large. He found solace in books and in the abstract world of mathematics, where logic and order prevailed over the messy complexities of human interaction. He graduated from high school at 15, and at the astonishingly young age of 16, he was accepted into Harvard University. This was an extraordinary achievement, placing him among the nation's brightest young minds. However, Harvard was a crucible for Kaczynski, a place where his intellectual prowess shone brightly, but where his social difficulties were exacerbated. He was younger than most of his classmates, shy, and struggled profoundly to form meaningful relationships. The competitive, often socially aggressive environment of Harvard, with its emphasis on networking and extracurricular engagement, proved to be a harsh landscape for his introverted nature. He felt out of place, an outsider looking in, and this feeling of alienation only deepened his existing social anxieties. It was during his time at Harvard that Kaczynski participated in a controversial psychological experiment conducted by Dr. Henry A. Murray, a prominent psychologist and former head of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, during World War II. This experiment, known as assessment of men, involved intense, verbally abusive interrogations designed to break down a subject's personality and test their reactions under extreme stress. Participants, including Kaczynski, were subjected to what were described as stress interviews, where their beliefs, values, and personal characteristics were aggressively challenged, ridiculed, and humiliated. The sessions were filmed, and participants were forced to watch their own reactions, further intensifying the psychological pressure. While the long-term impact of this specific experiment on Kaczynski remains a subject of intense debate and speculation among psychologists and biographers, it is undeniable that such an experience, particularly for a young, socially vulnerable individual already struggling with feelings of inadequacy and paranoia, could have profound and lasting effects. Kaczynski himself later described the experience as the worst thing that happened to me at Harvard, suggesting it contributed to his growing distrust of authority, his sense of persecution, and perhaps even his later anti-establishment ideology. Some theories suggest it may have exacerbated latent psychological vulnerabilities, potentially contributing to the development of paranoid tendencies. The ethical implications of Murray's experiment have been widely criticized in retrospect, highlighting a period in psychological research where the boundaries of human experimentation were less clearly defined. After graduating from Harvard in 1962, Kaczynski continued his academic journey, earning his master's degree and then his PhD in mathematics from the University of Michigan. His doctoral thesis, Boundary Functions and Related Functors, was a work of such complexity and originality that his professors struggled to understand it. One of his advisors, George Peranian, remarked that only about 10 or 12 people in the country were capable of comprehending it. Another, Alan Shields, described Kaczynski as not like the other graduate students, noting his intense focus and singular dedication to his work. His brilliance was unquestioned, his future in academia seemingly assured. He was offered a position at the University of Michigan, but declined, opting instead for a more prestigious opportunity. In 1967, at the age of 25, Ted Kaczynski was hired as an assistant professor of mathematics at the University of California, Berkeley, one of the most prestigious universities in the world. This was a remarkable achievement, placing him at the pinnacle of his chosen field. However, his tenure at Berkeley was short-lived and fraught with difficulty. Kaczynski was an unconventional and often unapproachable teacher. He struggled profoundly to connect with students, often lecturing from the blackboard with his back to the class, mumbling and refusing to answer questions. His disdain for the teaching aspect of his role was palpable, and he made little effort to engage with his students or colleagues. His social isolation deepened, and his discomfort with human interaction became more pronounced. He was perceived as aloof, eccentric, and sometimes even hostile. After less than 2 years, in 1969, he abruptly resigned without explanation. His colleagues were surprised, but perhaps not entirely shocked, given his reclusive nature and his evident struggles in the classroom. This resignation marked a significant turning point, a definitive break from the conventional academic path that had once seemed his destiny. It was a rejection of the very institutions that had nurtured his intellect, a first step towards his radical self-exile. Following his departure from Berkeley, Kaczynski returned to his parents' home in Lombard, Illinois, for a period. It was during this time that his disillusionment with modern society, and particularly with technology, began to solidify into a coherent, albeit radical, ideology. He spent hours in the local library, devouring books on sociology, philosophy, and the history of technology. He read the works of Jacques Ellul, a French philosopher and sociologist whose critiques of technological society deeply resonated with Kaczynski's nascent beliefs. Ellul argued that technology, far from being a neutral tool, had become an autonomous force, shaping human existence and eroding individual freedom. This intellectual framework provided Kaczynski with a lens through which to view the world, a justification for his growing contempt for industrial society. He also delved into the writings of other anti-industrial thinkers, synthesizing their ideas with his own observations and experiences. In 1971, Kaczynski made a decisive move, purchasing a small plot of land near Lincoln, Montana, and retreating to a remote cabin he built himself. This was not merely a change of scenery, it was a deliberate act of self-exile, a radical commitment to living off the grid, away from the perceived corruptions of modern civilization. His cabin was rudimentary, a 12-by-10-foot structure lacking electricity, running water, or indoor plumbing. He lived a Spartan existence, hunting small game, fishing, gathering wild edibles, and cultivating a small garden. He read extensively, wrote in his journals, and honed his survival skills, striving for complete self-sufficiency. This period of intense isolation, combined with his intellectual pursuits, allowed his anti-technology philosophy to fester and grow, transforming from abstract ideas into a deeply held, all-consuming conviction. He saw himself as conducting an experiment in primitive living, proving that a life free from technology was not only possible, but superior. His observations of the natural world around his cabin and the perceived encroachment of industrial society upon it further fueled his rage. He witnessed logging operations, road construction, and the increasing presence of motorized vehicles in the wilderness he cherished. These acts, in his mind, were not merely environmental degradation. They were direct assaults on human freedom and dignity, manifestations of the very technological system he believed was enslaving humanity. He saw the destruction of the wild as a metaphor for the destruction of the human spirit. His frustration mounted, transforming into a desire for action, a belief that only radical measures could halt the destructive march of progress. He began to believe that the system was so entrenched, so powerful, that only a violent revolutionary act could awaken humanity to its peril. He saw himself not as a criminal, but as a revolutionary, a necessary agent of change, a modern-day Luddite fighting against an unstoppable machine. Initially, Kaczynski engaged in small acts of sabotage, destroying machinery and vandalizing property he associated with environmental destruction. He sabotaged snowmobiles, cut power lines, and damaged construction equipment. These acts, however, did not satisfy his growing conviction that a more impactful statement was necessary. He came to believe that only through violence, through a targeted campaign of terror, could he effectively communicate his message and perhaps even spark a revolution against the industrial technological system. He meticulously planned his attacks, viewing them as scientific experiments in social engineering designed to provoke a response and force a societal reckoning. The Unabomber's reign of terror began on May 25, 1978, with the first recorded bombing incident at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. The target was Professor Buckley Crist, but the package, found in a parking lot, was addressed to a different professor. It was picked up by a campus police officer, Terry Marker, who noticed it was addressed to a professor whose name was misspelled. Marker took the package to Crist, who, suspicious, called the police. When the package was opened, it exploded, causing minor injuries to Marker's hand, including burns and lacerations. The device was crude, constructed from a metal pipe, black powder, and matches, but effective enough to cause harm. This initial attack, though relatively minor in its physical impact, marked the chilling genesis of a campaign that would span nearly 2 decades. Less than a year later, on May 9, 1979, a second bomb was discovered at Northwestern University. This time, it was left in a common area, and a graduate student, John Harris, was injured when it exploded. The device was similar to the first, indicating a consistent, albeit evolving, method of construction. The FBI was alerted. But without a clear motive or perpetrator, the incidents were initially treated as isolated acts of vandalism rather than the beginning of a coordinated campaign. The stakes escalated dramatically on November 15, 1979, with an incident aboard American Airlines Flight 444, a Boeing 727, flying from Chicago to Washington, D.C., a package placed in the cargo hold began to smoke, forcing an emergency landing at Dulles International Airport. While no one was seriously injured, the incident was terrifying, with passengers and crew fearing a catastrophic fire. Investigators later determined that the device was a bomb designed to ignite rather than explode, potentially causing a catastrophic fire in the cargo hold. The FBI, recognizing the potential for mass casualties and the clear link to the previous university bombings, launched a full-scale investigation, codenaming the case Unabomber, a portmanteau of university and airline bomber. This moniker would stick, becoming synonymous with the elusive perpetrator. The involvement of an aircraft immediately elevated the case to a federal priority, bringing in the full resources of the FBI. Over the next several years, Kaczynski continued his campaign, targeting individuals associated with universities and technology. On June 10, 1980, United Airlines President Percy Wood was severely injured when a bomb, disguised as a book, exploded in his home in Lake Forest, Illinois. Wood, a prominent figure in the airline industry, became a symbol of the Unabomber's expanding targets, moving beyond academic institutions to corporate leaders. The devices were becoming more refined, incorporating elements like handmade wooden components, specific types of wire, and carefully chosen chemicals. Kaczynski's meticulous nature, honed by his mathematical precision, was evident in every aspect of his bomb construction, making them difficult to trace and analyze. He often used common household items, but modified them in unique ways, leaving a distinct signature. The attacks continued sporadically, each one a chilling reminder of the bomber's presence. On May 5, 1982, a bomb exploded in a computer science building at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, injuring Secretary Janet Smith. On July 2, 1982, Professor Patrick Fisher of Vanderbilt, a computer science expert, was injured by a bomb sent to his home. On April 24, 1985, a bomb sent to the University of California, Berkeley, injured graduate student John Hauser, a computer science student. The targets were not random. They were carefully selected individuals who, in Kaczynski's twisted worldview, represented the technological system he sought to dismantle. He saw them as agents of the very industrial society he despised, and their injuries or deaths as necessary sacrifices in his revolutionary struggle. The first fatality occurred on December 11, 1985, when Hugh Scruton, a 38-year-old computer store owner in Sacramento, California, was killed by a bomb left in the parking lot of his business. This marked a grim escalation, transforming the Unabomber from a perpetrator of injuries to a murderer. The device was a pipe bomb, more powerful than previous ones, and its shrapnel proved lethal. The FBI intensified its efforts, but leads remained scarce. Kaczynski was a ghost, leaving behind only fragments of evidence, meticulously crafted components, often made from common materials, but assembled with a unique, almost artisanal touch. The lack of fingerprints, DNA, or clear eyewitness accounts made the investigation incredibly challenging. The bomber seemed to vanish after each attack, leaving investigators with little to go on beyond the remnants of his devices. The bombings continued into the late 1980s and early 1990s. On February 20, 1987, a bomb exploded outside a computer store in Salt Lake City, Utah, injuring store owner Gary Wright. This incident was notable because Wright saw a man placing the bomb, providing the first and only eyewitness description of the Unabomber. A white male, wearing a hooded sweatshirt and sunglasses, with a scraggly beard. This composite sketch, though vague, became a crucial, albeit limited, piece of the puzzle, offering a fleeting glimpse of the elusive perpetrator. After a 6-year hiatus, a period during which Kaczynski refined his ideology and perhaps his bomb-making techniques, the Unabomber resurfaced with renewed ferocity. On June 22, 1993, Charles Epstein, a geneticist at the University of California, San Francisco, was severely injured by a bomb sent to his home. The device was disguised as a book, a common tactic for Kaczynski. 2 days later, on June 24, 1993, David Gelernter, a computer science professor at Yale University, was also severely injured by a mail bomb. Gelernter lost the use of his right hand and suffered permanent vision damage. These attacks, targeting prominent figures in scientific and technological fields, underscored Kaczynski's ideological motivations, demonstrating his continued focus on those he perceived as driving technological advancement. The second fatality occurred on December 10, 1994, when Thomas J. Mosser, a 50-year-old advertising executive, was killed by a bomb sent to his home in North Caldwell, New Jersey. Mosser's company, Young and Rubicam, had worked with Exxon, a company Kaczynski despised for its environmental impact and its role in the industrial system. This attack further solidified the ideological nature of the bombings, showing Kaczynski's willingness to target individuals indirectly connected to his perceived enemies. The device was a sophisticated pipe bomb, demonstrating Kaczynski's continued evolution as a bomb maker. The final fatality came on April 24, 1995, when Gilbert P. Murray, president of the California Forestry Association, was killed by a mail bomb in Sacramento. Murray's organization represented the timber industry, another target of Kaczynski's environmental wrath and his broader anti-industrial agenda. By this point, the Unabomber had killed 3 people and injured 23 others in 16 separate attacks over 17 years. The nation was gripped by fear and frustration, as the FBI seemed no closer to catching the elusive bomber. The sheer duration of the campaign, coupled with the bomber's ability to evade capture, created a sense of helplessness and a growing public demand for answers. The Unabomber Task Force, a joint effort between the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, faced an unprecedented challenge. Kaczynski was a master of leaving minimal forensic evidence. He used common, untraceable materials, often scavenged or purchased in cash from various locations to avoid detection. He would travel to different cities, sometimes hundreds of miles from his cabin, to mail his packages, further obscuring his tracks. His bombs were meticulously constructed, often incorporating handmade wooden parts, specific types of wire, and unique chemical compositions. He even carved the initials FC into some of his devices, which he later revealed stood for Freedom Club, the name he gave to his revolutionary movement. These initials became a crucial, albeit cryptic, signature. The task force meticulously collected and analyzed every fragment of every device. They developed a profile of the bomber, highly intelligent, likely with a background in science or engineering, a loner, and driven by a deep-seated anti-technology ideology. They noted his precise, almost academic language in the few letters he sent, and the careful craftsmanship of his devices. They also noted his geographical pattern, with many of the early bombs originating in the Chicago area and later ones from California and Utah, suggesting a perpetrator who moved or traveled or at least had access to these regions. However, without a clear suspect, fingerprints, DNA, or clear eyewitness accounts, the investigation remained largely stalled, relying on forensic analysis of bomb components and the psychological profiling of an unknown assailant. The sheer volume of data, combined with the lack of direct leads, made it one of the most frustrating and expensive manhunts in FBI history. Then, in 1995, the Unabomber changed tactics, a move that would ultimately prove to be his undoing. He sent letters to the New York Times and the Washington Post, demanding that his 35,000-word manifesto, titled Industrial Society and Its Future, be published in a major newspaper or magazine. he threatened to continue his bombing campaign, potentially targeting an unspecified location if his demands were not met. This was a pivotal moment in the investigation. For the first time, the bomber was not just acting, he was communicating, articulating the philosophical underpinnings of his violence. He wanted his message to be heard, to be understood, to spark the revolution he so desperately desired. The decision to publish the manifesto was not taken lightly. It sparked a heated debate among law enforcement officials, civil liberties advocates, and media executives. On one hand, publishing the document meant giving a platform to a terrorist, potentially legitimizing his actions and encouraging others. It was a moral quandary of immense proportions. On the other hand, the FBI, particularly the Behavioral Analysis Unit, believed that publishing the manifesto might lead to a breakthrough. Perhaps someone recognizing the unique writing style, the specific turns of phrase, or the particular ideological arguments. Attorney General Janet Reno ultimately authorized the publication, believing it was the best chance to catch the Unabomber and prevent further loss of life. The public safety imperative outweighed the concerns about giving a platform to a terrorist. On September 19, 1995, Industrial Society and Its Future was published as a special 8-page supplement in both the New York Times and the Washington Post. The manifesto was a dense, intellectually rigorous, and deeply disturbing document. In it, Kaczynski argued that the industrial technological system was destroying human freedom and dignity. He posited that technology, by making life too easy and by imposing a rigid, artificial structure on human existence, deprived individuals of the power process, the natural human need to strive for and achieve goals, to exert effort and see the results. This deprivation, he argued, led to widespread psychological suffering, alienation, and a sense of powerlessness. He called for a revolution against this system, advocating for a return to a more primitive, agrarian way of life, a dismantling of the technological infrastructure that he believed enslaved humanity. The manifesto was a complex blend of astute social commentary and radical, violent conclusions. It contained detailed arguments about the nature of freedom, the dangers of genetic engineering, the psychological impact of modern life, and the inevitability of technological control. While many found its call for violence abhorrent, some of its critiques of technology and modern society resonated with a segment of the public, sparking uncomfortable conversations about the direction of human progress and the unforeseen consequences of technological advancement. The document revealed a mind of extraordinary intellectual capacity, but one that had become utterly consumed by a singular, destructive obsession, a profound paranoia about the future of humanity under the yoke of technology. The publication of the manifesto was indeed the breakthrough the FBI had hoped for, though it came from an unexpected source. The bomber's own family, David Kaczynski, Ted's younger brother, had long harbored suspicions about his reclusive sibling. He knew of Ted's extreme anti-technology views and his self-imposed exile in Montana. He had also received letters from Ted over the years, filled with similar philosophical arguments and a distinctive writing style. David and his wife, Linda Patrick, had discussed their concerns about Ted's mental state and his increasingly radical views for years. When David and Linda read the Unabomber manifesto, a chilling realization dawned upon them. The language, the specific phrases, the intellectual arguments, the unique turns of phrase, and the overall tone were eerily familiar. It was Ted. The recognition was agonizing, a profound moral crisis for David. How could he turn in his own brother, a man he loved, despite his eccentricities and his increasingly disturbing worldview? Yet how could he not? Knowing the potential for further violence and death, knowing that his brother was responsible for the terror that had gripped the nation. Linda Potrek played a crucial role in convincing David to act. She recognized the gravity of the situation and the moral imperative to prevent further harm. She meticulously compiled a dossier of Ted's writings, comparing them to the manifesto, and the similarities were undeniable. After much internal struggle, and with the support of a private investigator and a lawyer, David Kaczynski contacted the FBI in early 1996. He provided them with letters and essays written by his brother, allowing investigators to compare the writing style with the manifesto. The similarities were striking, almost undeniable, particularly in the use of certain idiosyncratic phrases and the consistent articulation of his anti-technology philosophy. The FBI, cautious after years of false leads and the immense pressure of the case, began a meticulous covert investigation into Ted Kaczynski. They learned about his academic background, his abrupt resignation from Berkeley, and his retreat to the Montana wilderness. They discovered his remote cabin, a place where he lived in extreme isolation, far from any neighbors or modern amenities, a life deliberately chosen to escape the very system he was attacking. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, forming a coherent picture of the elusive Unabomber. The FBI obtained a search warrant for Kaczynski's cabin, carefully planning the operation to ensure his capture without incident and to preserve the fragile evidence within his primitive dwelling. On April 3, 1996, after months of careful surveillance, federal agents descended upon Ted Kaczynski's cabin near Lincoln, Montana. The arrest was conducted without incident. Kaczynski, a slight bearded man, was found living in squalor, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the evidence of his radical ideology. The cabin, though small, was a treasure trove for investigators. Inside, they found a vast array of bomb-making materials, including chemicals, wires, pipes, batteries, and various components. They also discovered a fully assembled live bomb, ready for deployment, along with detailed schematics and notes on bomb construction. Perhaps most damning were Kaczynski's meticulously kept journals and notebooks. These documents, spanning decades, detailed his plans, his philosophical musings, and his accounts of the bombings. He had kept a detailed record of every device he built, every target he selected, and every attack he carried out, often using coded language to describe his actions. The journals provided an undeniable link between Ted Kaczynski and the Unabomber. They were a chilling testament to his methodical nature, his intellectual precision, and his unwavering commitment to his violent cause. The evidence was overwhelming, leaving no doubt that the man living in the remote Montana cabin was indeed the perpetrator of the long-running bombing campaign. The discovery of the FC initials carved into his workbench further solidified the connection to the Freedom Club signature found on some of his bombs. Following his arrest, Ted Kaczynski was charged with 10 counts of illegally transporting, mailing, and using bombs, resulting in 3 deaths and numerous injuries. The legal proceedings that followed were as complex and contentious as the investigation itself. Kaczynski's defense team, appointed by the court, sought to present an insanity defense, arguing that their client suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and was therefore not criminally responsible for his actions. They believed that his extreme anti-technology views, his isolated lifestyle, and his apparent delusions of grandeur were symptoms of a severe mental illness that had rendered him incapable of understanding the wrongfulness of his actions. However, Kaczynski vehemently rejected this defense. He saw himself not as insane, but as a rational revolutionary, a prophet whose actions were a logical response to the existential threat posed by the industrial technological system. He feared that an insanity defense would undermine his message, reducing his carefully constructed ideology to the ramblings of a madman. He wanted his trial to be a platform for his ideas, a forum where his manifesto could be debated and understood, where society would be forced to confront the truths he believed he had uncovered. This fundamental disagreement led to a deep rift between Kaczynski and his lawyers, culminating in his attempt to fire them and represent himself. He believed his lawyers were trying to silence his message by pathologizing him. The court, however, denied his request to represent himself, citing concerns about his mental competency. Judge Garland Ellis Burrell, Jr. ordered a psychiatric evaluation, which Kaczynski resisted fiercely, viewing it as a further attempt to discredit him. The evaluation, conducted by forensic psychiatrist Sally Johnson, concluded that Kaczynski suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, but was competent to stand trial. This finding, while confirming his mental illness, did not automatically mean he was legally insane at the time of the crimes. Faced with the prospect of a trial where his lawyers would argue he was insane and potentially being forced to undergo a psychiatric evaluation that he viewed as an assault on his integrity, Kaczynski ultimately accepted a plea bargain. On January 22, 1998, he pleaded guilty to all charges, avoiding the death penalty in exchange for a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This plea deal brought an end to the legal saga, but it did not resolve the profound. It was a pragmatic decision to avoid execution, but one that Kaczynski made with deep reluctance, feeling that his voice had been suppressed. He was incarcerated at the Supermax prison ADX Florence in Colorado, a facility designed to house the nation's most dangerous criminals. There, he continued to write and articulate his anti-technology philosophy, corresponding with various individuals, and publishing essays and books that further expounded on his views. Even behind bars, Kaczynski remained a figure of intense fascination and debate. Was he a brilliant but deranged individual, a victim of his own mind and perhaps the psychological experiments of his youth, or was he a chillingly rational, albeit misguided, revolutionary whose critiques of modern society, however extreme, contained uncomfortable truths that society was unwilling to confront? The answer perhaps lies in a complex interplay of both, a tragic confluence of intellectual genius, profound social alienation, and the insidious progression of mental illness. His writings from prison continued to advocate for a radical societal transformation, maintaining his belief that the Unabomber case, in its chilling entirety, offers a unique anatomy of crime. It is not merely a story of a serial bomber, but a profound exploration of the human intellect, its capacity for both brilliance and destruction. The anatomy of this case is defined by the radicalization of a prodigious mind, a mind that, in its profound isolation, forged a destructive ideology, and then meticulously executed a campaign of terror to propagate it. Kaczynski's journey from a Harvard prodigy to a hermit bomber is a stark illustration of how intellectual gifts, when combined with deep-seated psychological vulnerabilities and extreme isolation, can lead to a terrifying distortion of reality and a justification for horrific violence. What makes Kaczynski's case so distinct is the intellectual rigor he applied to his violence. His bombs were not random acts of rage. They were calculated statements, each target chosen to amplify his message and strike at the heart of the system he despised. His manifesto, for all its disturbing conclusions, was a work of considerable intellectual depth, forcing society to confront uncomfortable questions about progress, technology, and freedom. The anatomy here is the fusion of abstract thought with concrete, deadly action, a rare and terrifying combination that elevates his crimes beyond mere criminality into a realm of ideological warfare. Furthermore, the case dissects the anatomy of a prolonged, forensic nightmare for law enforcement. Kaczynski's meticulousness, his ability to leave minimal evidence, and his deliberate choice of untraceable materials allowed him to evade capture for nearly 2 decades. The investigation became a testament to the power of forensic science, but also to its limitations when faced with a truly cunning and isolated perpetrator. The sheer volume of evidence collected, from bomb fragments to the unique components Kaczynski crafted, required an unprecedented level of forensic analysis and cross-referencing. Yet the breakthrough ultimately came not from a fingerprint or a DNA sample, but from the agonizing moral courage of a family member who recognized the unique voice of the bomber in his published manifesto. This highlights the critical role of human intelligence and the unexpected avenues through which justice can sometimes be found. Finally, the Unabomber case dissects the anatomy of a family's impossible choice. David Kaczynski's decision to turn in his brother is a poignant and powerful example of moral fortitude, a testament to the profound human capacity to prioritize the greater good, even at immense personal cost. It highlights the devastating ripple effects of such crimes, extending beyond the immediate victims to tear at the fabric of families and communities, forcing individuals to make choices that no one should ever have to face. David's actions, driven by a desire to prevent further bloodshed, ultimately saved lives, but at the cost of his relationship with his brother and a lifetime of emotional burden. Ted Kaczynski spent over 2 decades in ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. His health declined significantly in his later years. In December 2021, he was transferred from the Supermax prison to the Federal Medical Center, Butner, a federal prison medical facility in North Carolina, due to his deteriorating health. This transfer indicated a recognition by federal authorities that his medical needs could no longer be adequately met within the confines of ADX Florence. On June 10, 2023, Theodore John Kaczynski died at the age of 81. He was found unresponsive in his cell at FMC Butner in the early hours of the morning. The official cause of death was later confirmed by the Federal Bureau of Prisons as suicide by hanging. This final act, in a life defined by calculated control and a relentless pursuit of his own agenda, added another layer of complexity to his already enigmatic persona. His death closed a chapter on one of America's most infamous domestic terrorists, but the questions he raised, however violently, continue to echo. The Unabomber's legacy is a stark reminder of the dangerous precipice where genius can meet madness, where conviction can curdle into destruction, and where the pursuit of an ideal, however noble in its initial intent, can lead to unimaginable horror. His story forces us to consider the profound and often unsettling relationship between humanity and the technology it creates, and the enduring complex anatomy of a mind that chose to. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.